is there a good reason to believe that the word firmament in Genesis 1 means it was a solid sky? Is that what it meant in that context?
Yeah, I don't think so. And I don't actually think the word firmament is the best translation, because that idea does carry a connotation of something like that's a firm and solid support. And that's why I think expanse is probably the better translation.
Expanse.
That's right. And that's how many translations render it. But the reason some say that the Hebrew term, again, on day 2, when God separated the waters above and below, in between he makes a rakia, either firmament or expanse. The reason some say rakia ought to be identified with something solid is because related words, like that's the noun rakia, but the verb rakah means to beat out or stamp out something. It would often be applied to metals that were spread out, like a soft metal like gold you'd pound into sheets to make gold leaf, for example. And so often that verb rakah does have solid things that are being expanded, but it's not necessarily the case that you can tell just from the related words what the meaning of a word is. You need to look at it in its context and see how it's used in the Bible. And so that term is used 17 times in Scripture. I would argue in none of those cases does it clearly indicate the sky is solid. More likely, it's a reference to the heavenly expanse, which from an earthbound observer's perspective is very extensive. It's spread out from horizon to horizon over our heads. And sometimes the language in Scripture compares the heavens to a tent, right? Just like if you're underneath a giant tent and you look up and the ceiling of the tent is very spread out over your head. That's how the heavens appear to us from our perspective on the earth.
If you're enjoying this interview so far, you might be interested to know that we also produce the world's most widely read magazine on the creation-evolution controversy, Creation Magazine. It's packed with beautifully illustrated articles showing how real science supports the Bible. It's designed for the whole family, and it is a great tool to strengthen your faith. Sign up now to receive 4 issues a year. Follow the link in the description. Now back to the interview. And you're not alone in understanding it as an expanse. There's other scholars that have come to the same idea.
Yeah, certainly. It's a controversial subject, but as I say, many Bible translations render it as expanse.
Well, that brings me to the next question, which is, why did the KJV translators go with the word firmament?
It does have a long history that the King James translators were depending heavily, in this case, on the Latin Vulgate, which uses a similar term, firmamentum, which again connotes the idea of something solid. That in turn depended on the much, much older Greek translation of the Old Testament.
Oh, interesting. So not the original Hebrew of the Bible in the Old Testament, the
not directly.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, the Hebrew term here is rakia. That's the original language of the Old Testament. But centuries before Christ, when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, that translation is called the Septuagint. And the Greek translators rendered the term rakia as stereoma in the Greek. And that term does also indicate something solid. But there's a good reason to explain why they chose that term, because in that time period, in the Greek culture, they largely believed not in this solid dome snow globe cosmology. Instead, they by that time did understand that the earth was spherical. The Greeks, 300 years before Christ, had worked out the circumference of the earth. But what they instead believed is that there were these concentric crystalline spheres that contained the planets and the sun and moon and so forth that surrounded the earth and rotated, right? So they did believe in a solid sky, but of a much different sort. And so you can sort of understand why, even if it seems to me that they misunderstood the term rakia in their day, but I think there are good reasons to believe the Hebrew term does not include the idea of solidity.
So was the word steroma the word to refer to these crystalline spheres?
It is used that way, yeah.
Interesting. So then what are the reasons to think that the Bible supports understanding rakia as expanse instead of solid dome?
Okay. A few clues that we get from Genesis 1 itself. The first clue is that we get a synonym for the rakia when it's named. The rakia, after God makes it, he calls it the heavens, shamayim in Hebrew. And the ancient Hebrews certainly did understand the heavens as a spacious region where the birds fly, where the clouds float, and so forth. And there's really a parallel with other things God names in Genesis 1. After God makes the dry land, he names it earth. The dry land is equivalent to the earth, right? These things are coextensive. It's not as though the dry land is a small slice of the earth. But you see, that's what people are saying about the rakia, that it's not really the whole of the heavens, that it's just a little slice of heaven, this solid barrier way up by the waters above. Similarly, with the waters below, once they're separated from the dry land, they're named the seas. Waters and the seas are coextensive. They refer to the same thing. And so I think that is an indication that it's likely the case the rakia just is the heavens. It's coextensive with it, and so it refers to an open, spacious area. A second clue in Genesis 1 of the meaning of this term rakia is that when God creates it, he says it's in the midst of the waters below and the waters above. And that expression in Hebrew, it's faithfully rendered in English as in the midst. That expression, when it's used elsewhere in the Bible, it doesn't have to refer to something that's, right in the dead center of something, but it seems to refer to something that's solidly within whatever is being described, rather than like all the way to one side hugging the edge. But, if the rakia does mean a solid barrier, it's nowhere close to the seas. It's way up there next to the waters above. And so is it really fair to describe that as in the midst? I think that'd be an odd use of language, a bit like if I were to say, a highway on the west coast of the United States, all the way at the far edge. Is that in the midst of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans? Nobody speaks that way, right? Even though it's in between, it's not in the midst. The continental United States is what's in the midst of those oceans. And so that would seem to fit also. Creationists disagree with how to understand exactly what the waters above refer to, but everybody agrees that the waters below are the seas, and what's immediately above that, not a solid barrier, but a big, open, spacious expanse. And so these are indications, I think, that lend credibility to this idea that expanse is the right translation and a solid, extended surface is a mistranslation.
This has been a fantastic conversation. And I think that a lot of our listeners maybe have been hearing these ideas for the first time. They probably have more questions or other science-related questions while they're thinking about the Bible and interpretation. So do you have a resource that you would recommend to them that they can use?
Well, one of my favorite tools for training people to defend the faith is Creation Magazine. And this comes out 4 times a year. It's full color with no paid advertising, 56 pages each issue. And in Creation Magazine, we cover all kinds of scientific evidence that corroborates the existence of God, as well as what he's revealed to us in his word about how he created. And so we talk about, design features in living things and in the universe, and evidence from geology that there was a worldwide flood, as is taught in Genesis, and so on. And so it's just a great, faith-strengthening tool to equip families.
Excellent. So if you want to sign up for Creation Magazine, you will find a link that you can follow in the description.